everyone, Nick from Vant Trading here, coming at you with another informative and educational video. Today I'm going to be covering the Biden infrastructure bill, otherwise known as the American Jobs Plan. I'm going to be going through exactly what is composed within this bill, give you a little bit of a breakdown as to what the contents are, and help you walk away from this video with a pretty good understanding as to, well, what is in this bill? Where is this money going? What is the plan with this bill? What's the goal of this bill? I'll be talking about each section that you see before you now, and I'll be going in depth. I'll be giving you a general overview based on my own research. I'm going to be trying to stay as objective as possible. This is educational and informational only. It is not to give you my opinion on this bill as much as possible or any political commentary. I will crack jokes from time to time, and maybe I'll make a side comment on some certain things, but this is really to inform you so that you can then go up to someone and hold your own and have a conversation, or if there's something that might intrigue you a little more, you now know where you need to start digging. I am not an economist. I will not be able to give you the true impact of this on the economy in the short term or the long term, whether it's going to be good, bad, the nets, the negatives. I will at some point give you some others' opinions that I've seen doing a little digging myself. I am not a government expert. I will not know what the implementation of this bill would look like if it did pass both the House and the Senate. I'm just here to kind of give you the breakdown as to, well, okay, I know that there's a $2 trillion infrastructure bill, but what does that mean? What is infrastructure? What is the allocation of these funds, and what is the plan? So this is going to be a little unique. Usually I do PowerPoint, but today I tried to spice it up a little bit in lieu of a different topic. And it is not trading focused. It's more informational, educational, and finance, and just informative, because we as voters and as Americans, or as people around the world, need to be informed as much as possible. Reminder, if you have any questions or comments or you want me to elaborate on anything, drop it in the comment section below. If this at all helped you or informed you, please drop a like for me and follow our YouTube and subscribe for future video updates. So without further ado, let's dive into this Biden infrastructure bill. First of all, it's approximately a $2 to $3 trillion plan to rebuild the infrastructure and to reshape the economy. These are words that I'm pulling from the bill itself and from the pundits and people who reported on it. It is generally an 8-year plan, which means that this isn't all going out and flooding out into the world at once. Some of these parts of this bill are going to be spread out over years. Like I said, it has also been named the American Jobs Plan. I believe it is Biden's camp that has named it that themselves. It is part one of a two-part plan. So this part one, which I'll be talking about now, is more infrastructure, climate-related, education infrastructure. Part two is going to be another $1 to $2 trillion, and that is going to be focused on whatever key domestic economic issues entails. That would entail things like child care, child giving, work, and the workforce hit hardest by the pandemic. So this is largely what we're going to be talking about. Now, a couple notes I want to make note of, but I will be touching back upon. The planning on funding this is largely going to be derived from hiking corporate taxes. That is the plan. It is also important to note that this is not law yet. You may be hearing about it, but that's because it is being presented to the House. This is going to have a long debate, discussion, concessions from both parties, all through Congress. Things in this bill could get changed, added, removed in order to help pass this bill. And if people are wondering, well, why infrastructure? Is our infrastructure really that bad? It kind of is. The American Society of Civil Engineers has given this nation's infrastructure a C-. Public domestic investment as a share of the economy has fallen 40% since the 1960s in our infrastructure. Part of this is going to be, 20,000 miles of rebuilding roads and repairing some of the most important bridges out there, fixing lead pipes, doing things like that. So that's really what we're going to be focusing on here. So this is the makeup here. You've got a large percentage of this going to transportation. A lot of this is going to be going to home care services and home care workforce, manufacturing, housing, research and development, water, schools, digital infrastructure, workforce development, and veteran hospitals and federal buildings. So there's a pretty diverse selection here in front of us, and that's going to be one of the largest complaints that we're seeing from people, which I'll touch upon in a moment. But first off, let's focus in on transportation. It's almost a third of the bill. What is the plan here, and what does this outline? Well, they're planning about $621 billion towards transportation. And I've I've got two breakdowns here for you. The first half of this is roads, bridges, ports, waterways, airports, and railways. Exactly what you'd imagine with transportation. 115 billion of that is going to actually trying to improve roads, highways, main streets. If you live in Maryland, I'm sure you know the Beltway is always under construction. And if you live in pretty much any suburban or rural American area, you know that we probably don't have the best streets. The goal there is to improve and modernize streets. $20 billion, improved road safety. $80 billion is Amtrak repair backlog and to modernize that kind of corridor line between Boston and D.C. That's going to be important as they have a pretty significant backlog. $25 billion is going towards airports, and $17 billion is going to inland waterways, ports, and ferries. Now, in terms of bridges, they said that they were planning on focusing on the most economically significant large bridges, and then about 10,000 of the smaller bridges. So what you see before you is what you get. It's putting money into the parts of the transportation industry within the United States, trying to hit every sector based on a certain proportion. I don't know how within some of these plans, like what that $80 billion or $25 billion towards airports is doing. I don't even know if it's been fully outlined yet, but this is the current breakdown, and this is what we're seeing. Out there, generally, I haven't seen too much complaints within this section alone. Next up, you have another section, and this is going towards public transit and electric vehicles in service, and this is for the economy and for general congestion. That's the goal here. $85 billion of this is going to modernize existing transit and expand agencies for demand. And the goal here is to essentially double the funding for public transit. You have a $174 billion investment into the electric vehicle market. Biden ran on this platform on investing EV and on climate change. It's a pillar of the Democratic Party, and so obviously they would put their money where their mouth is here. This is going to include rebates and tax incentives if you buy American-made electric vehicles, a grant and incentivized program to build a national network of over 500,000 charging stations throughout the country with a goal of reaching that by 2030. They want to electrify 20% of the yellow school buses out there, and they want to replace up to 50,000 diesel transit vehicles. We're talking the buses and the actual transit vehicles themselves. So part of this $621 billion that's going to transportation is going to be for the actual roads, railways, airports, waterways, so on. And another smaller portion of it is going to be going to trying to electrify and modernize a lot of the transit out there and double the funding for public transit as a whole. That's what we're seeing within transportation. Now, let's talk about home care services and the home care workforce. Again, I'm just giving you the information now. I will give you a little more insight towards the end. Now, the home care services and workforce is really going to be giving that bolstering caregiving for aging and disabled Americans. That's the goal on this one. So we're giving about $400 billion in this section. And the goal here is to expand beyond just home care and disabled care within institutions and try to make that more home care centered. So they're also expanding access to long-term Medicaid, and it's estimated that if they did this, it would eliminate the wait list for hundreds of thousands that are currently sitting on the wait list. They are planning on improving wages for at-home health workers. It's currently sitting around an average of $12 an hour. And they say that this is important because it's approximate that 1 in 6 of home health workers currently live in poverty. So the goal there is almost like a little bit of a targeted minimum wage hike rather than, across the board like we've heard in the past. They also want to build the infrastructure for caregiving workers to be able to join a union. I don't know what this looks like. I don't know what their plan is on this, but this is where we're seeing the centering on home care services and the home care workforce. Obviously, this has become a hot topic during the pandemic when people have been trapped in their homes. They needed health and medical care, but they haven't been able to get to hospitals. And home care services and home care workforce are technically on the front lines of a pandemic. So that's where we are with that section. Now we're going to talk about manufacturing. What does manufacturing mean? It's very broad. Well, we're going to have about $300 billion dedicated to this manufacturing section. About $50 billion is going to be invested into semiconductor manufacturing. And some of this is with the implicit goal of kind of competing with China. $30 billion is going to medical manufacturing, and the goal there is to help shore up response to future outbreaks or pandemics. They also want to do $20 billion for regional innovation hubs. This is supposed to be some kind of community-led projects. The details of that I am unsure about. $46 billion are for federal purchases of things like electric vehicles, charging ports, and electric heat pumps for housing and commercial buildings. So again, kind of going in that modernizing and climate change focused changing of some of these buildings and workplaces. You also have some allocated in there for manufacturers that focus on clean energy, for rural communities, and for programs that give small businesses access to credit. This is all that's entailed in the manufacturing. It's a little more targeted in this case. It's not across the board manufacturing, but this is where we're seeing a lot of this money get allocated. Next up, let's talk about housing. Housing's kind of broad as well. What is housing? Well, in this case, we're talking about, really the lower to middle income housing projects. This is going to be about $213 billion put into housing. We're talking about building, renovating, retrofitting more than 2 million American homes and housing units, rehabbing 500,000 homes for low to middle income homebuyers specifically. There's a little bit of talk about eliminating the exclusionary zoning laws. I am not versed in zoning laws or home building laws. That's something you may want to look in itself, but it's something that they claim is something that drives up prices and artificially prices out people out of communities. I'm not sure on that. Homes would be upgraded through block grant programs, and this would allow them to extend and expand home and commercial efficiency tax credits. So again, just trying to help lift up kind of the lower end of this housing section, help the lower to middle income, do a little bit of renovation and rehabbing on a lot of these public housing units. So now let's zoom back out here and let's talk about another section. This is going to be, kind of where we start to zoom in here on these smaller slices of the pie, research and development. What is research and development? Well, in this case, we're talking $180 billion of this plan would go towards research infrastructure for climate science, innovation, and R&D. They also want to target on eliminating racial and gender inequities in R&D, science, technology, engineering, and math, and spend some of this money towards R&D investments in historically black colleges and other minority-serving institutions. Again, this is another pillar that the Democratic Party has really tried to run on, trying to be the party for the underrepresented and the minorities and a lot of groups like that. So this is kind of them trying to make a stance on that and trying to prove that this is where they're trying to divert their money towards, while also still hitting that climate change and climate science programs. So the exact plans on how they plan on doing these investments and where this R&D is going, I don't know if that's been outlined yet, but this is something to keep an eye on. Now let's zoom back out and go to the next section. Water. Water, really? What are we talking about when it comes to water? Well, actually something very specific here. We're talking about rebuilding the country's water infrastructure. Many of you may be like, well, my water's fine. Yes, but what they want to do is replace all of the nation's lead pipes and service lines. We do still have lead pipes out there in our water and in our waterways. A lot of people remember Flint, Michigan, and that's still ongoing. They don't have drinking water there. So the goal here is to reduce lead exposure in over 400,000 schools and child care facilities. They want to upgrade the country's drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater systems. I don't know the plans on that exactly. And they want to support clean water infrastructure in rural America. This is kind of in that green initiative, but it's also just general, kind of updating our water's infrastructure system, because it seems like at face value, without me doing any further digging, that part of this does seem a little outdated. Now, next section, schools. Yes, schools. This is going to be something a little in particular and specific as well. $100 billion of this plan will be going to schools. We're talking building new public schools, upgrading existing public schools with better ventilation, better technology, and improved kitchens for healthier meals. $12 billion specifically planned for infrastructure needs of community colleges around the country. $25 billion are going to be used to help upgrade child care facilities. And then they want to incorporate a tax credit in our tax system for employers to build child care facilities at a place of work. Again, this is another section where I'm not really seeing much pushback or any negative commentary from either side of the pundits there or the political parties, because it's the school system, it's the children, and some of this, let's be honest, needs to be upgraded. Now, let's continue on here and let's look at the next section, which is going to be digital infrastructure. We're talking that green section right in the middle there, and it's another 5% of this bill. $100 billion of the digital infrastructure. This one was just straight up one thing that I saw in this, and that is giving Americans access to affordable, high-speed broadband. The goal here seems to be to build a broadband infrastructure to reach 100% cover across the nation. how I'm very curious about this one. I'm curious as to who's going to be running this, how where it's going to be housed. That's a lot of internet to be providing. I'm sure that most people would be all for this, especially if you've ever had to deal with some of the internet service providers in this country. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Spectrum, Comcast, Verizon. Those, I don't think anyone's going to be shedding a tear for those companies if this does uproot something like that. And I don't know the efficiency of this program or anything like that, but that's what the $100 billion towards digital infrastructure is going towards. Next up, we've got only 2 more sections here. We're talking workforce development. Another 5% here. What is workforce development? Well, out of the $100 billion going towards workforce development, $40 billion is going to be on retraining dislocated workers that have kind of been removed due to consolidation within industries and sectors. $12 billion are going to be to train formerly incarcerated citizens, and they're going to be using a subsidized jobs program through that. They have several other plans and details within there. $48 billion are going towards apprenticeships, career pathway programs for middle and high school students, as well as job training programs at community colleges. So really one of the large parts of this workforce development goal seems to be to helping underserved groups and getting students on career paths before high school. Some people may be wondering, well, why are we trying to get our children in the workforce? Some families don't have an option. Some children, apprenticeships and a lot of the labor classes like that actually are, very favorable pathways for a lot of low-income families. And the goal here is to try to help them get them on that track early before they fall into despair or turn to any other kind of alternative method to making money. Now, one of the other things, and the final thing we're talking about here, is veteran hospitals and federal buildings. Just under 1% of this bill as a whole, so it's nothing major here, and really it's only focusing on 2 things. Modernizing the Veteran Affairs hospitals. I saw that it's on average, a Veteran Affairs hospital is 40 years older than the private sector hospitals. I don't think we're going to see any blowback or pushback on this part of the bill whatsoever. I don't think anyone's going to push back on Veteran Affairs hospitals and helping that. We might see some blowback on $10 billion going to modernizing federal buildings. I don't exactly know what that entails or what they're planning there. So that's it as a whole. That's the different pieces of this Biden infrastructure bill. I know I kind of glazed through this, but this really isn't going to be an hour-long video. I don't want you to get out into the weeds here where you're starting to lose attention and you're not really understanding some of the things I'm talking about, but this is generally where this $2 trillion bill is going. Now, you may be wondering, like a lot of others, how do they plan on paying for this? Yes, you've heard about the corporate tax hike. That is where a lot of this is centered around. They plan on raising the corporate taxes from 21% to 28% across the board to fund this bill. Now, the goal here is to do also to close several loopholes within the corporate tax system, a global minimum tax on corporations country to country, and the goal here is to deter companies from sheltering profits by claiming that they made them or that they're housed in other countries around the world. There's also going to be a tax on book income instead of the reported IRS income. The goal here again is to avoid the companies reporting that they made $0 in income, which we all know they didn't, and then not having to pay any taxes. And then also they want it to make it a little more difficult to merge or acquire with a foreign business and then claim that they don't have to pay U.S. taxes by claiming to be a foreign company. Yes, that actually apparently happens a lot. And so the goal here is to really kind of pull a lot of the funding for this bill over the next several years from raising corporate taxes. Now, several things I want to point out here. This is partially biased, but not really. It's going to be important to note that, to be fair, prior to 2017, before Trump's tax plan was enacted, the corporate tax rates were 35%. So when that 14% cut went, did we really see that trickle down over the last 3 to 4 years? Largely, if you do your research, I did a bare minimum amount of research here, the answer is actually largely no, not compared to that 14% cut that we saw in corporate taxes. They're not asking to raise this back up to 35. It's important to note it's a raise up to 28%. But this right here, the funding strategy, is where we're seeing the most amount of pushback from the Republican Party, obviously. Now, it is also important to note that we are not seeing a wealth tax in here proposed. That is something that a lot of people were looking for because there were proponents out there like Elizabeth Warren who wanted that wealth tax imposed within here to help fund. It is not being imposed in here. That may help them sway some GOP senators on their side. Unlikely. So this is largely the plan here on funding this strategy. So what about others' opinions? There are people out there who are a lot smarter than me. That's why I'm trying to remain as impartial and informative as possible. I did a little bit of digging here, and I saw just a couple of numbers out there. The U.S. chief economist at S&P Global, Beth Ann Bovino, said that she plans that this would create 2.3 million jobs by 2024 and inject $5.7 trillion into the economy. Okay, a good estimation there. And keep in mind, I do not know these people's biases, prior history. I didn't do that much digging into these people. I just want to give you some face value estimates here. Chief economist at Moody's says that it's large, but let's be honest, we have a large problem. Our infrastructure system right now is barely keeping up with the pace as it is. This is probably something that no one can really disagree with. They believe that the net addition to deficit should be modest in the grand scheme of things if this corporate tax program manages to fund the program as planned. The largest critic complaint I'm seeing out there is that this is too broad. And that's fair. You know, this is very almost indiscriminate spending. A lot of the critics are saying that we need more targeted, focused spending, make a bill just on the transportation, then make a bill just on this. And there are arguments on both sides of this as to whether that's politically possible. But that is one of our largest criticisms that I'm seeing out there as well, is it is very, very broad for an infrastructure bill. Now, I did see that on Sunday, economists at Goldman Sachs actually revised their outlook for growth this year, actually upping it. So there is some positive news looking forward for the U.S. GDP for the remainder of this year. I did see also an interesting little stat here. The Census Bureau Household Pulse Survey said that 9 million renters are currently behind on their payments. 19.2% of U.S. adults are expecting a loss of employment income in the next 4 weeks. 10.7% of them do not have enough to eat. This is not any kind of commentary, but more of a statement on the situation and saying that, yes, we do need something to stimulate the economy. Whether this is it, whether this would work, whether this would create the jobs we need and get the spending we need and get the GDP to grow in the long term, I don't know. But there is a situation out there, and that there is still a struggling working class. We're still sitting at over 4 times pre-pandemic unemployment. Now, what are some final things to note here? Any important notes I want to mention here, and something that I need you to take away? Well, Pelosi came out already and said that she hopes that they can get this to pass the House by July 4th. Yes, I'm pretty sure she said July 4th. I honestly want to double check that now that I'm looking at this, because that's several months. I'm guessing that they expect that this is going to have a lot of negotiating within it. Also, administration within the White House says that the tax plan would take 15 years to fully offset the cost of the plan. So this is a long term. We're not getting the cost back. This is going to affect the deficit in the short term, and this is really the plan. But here's the question: as a new administration comes in, if they change that corporate tax rate, does that kind of screw up the funding plan for this bill long term? That's our American political system. That's something that we have to take into consideration. And something that is obviously going to be possible over the coming months is there are probably going to have to be concessions made. So we're probably going to see changes to this bill. For example, Schumer wants the current cap on state and local tax deductions removed. That's probably going to be something that if Biden wants him to even remotely play ball, he'll have to incorporate in here, especially if we're talking taxes. Now, this is nowhere near as large as what progressive Democrats want. It is nowhere near as large as what, say, an AOC or a Bernie Sanders want this spending to be. So there is a little bit of middle ground being met here, and there's no wealth tax in here. So there are going to be things in here that may appeal to certain members of the GOP base and may allow for more discussion, a little more back and forth and bipartisan agreement here. It's going to be interesting to see what the result of this are. Long term, I'm sure there's going to be some effects on the economy. There's going to be effects on the market. Short term, it's going to be very curious to see what the expectations are within the certain sectors and within certain stocks. We're seeing a lot of infrastructure for solar in there, for electric vehicles, and for other aspects of climate change, some things that may not have been expected. There are also a lot of broad strokes in here. Are they going to hone in on things? Are they going to have to drop things off? I don't know. But this was kind of our skimming of the surface of the Biden infrastructure plan that came out today. And I'm sure if you want to look into this more yourself, I'm sure there are dozens and dozens of pages being written and dozens of opinions being formed. So I just want you to walk away here feeling a little more informed yourself, at least from a subjective what is entailed in this infrastructure bill. I hope that this was helpful and informative. I'm sorry I went this long. I didn't want to go too long because I don't want you to have to sit here and listen about infrastructure that long. But this was Nick from Vant Trading. Let me know if you have any thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you for tuning in, and as always, safe trading.